And I am the Data Core's Steering Committee Chair, and I'd like to welcome you to today's seminar. I'm just going to give you a couple quick follow-up announcements. Some of you may have been part of the virtual spring ADRC meeting, and so I just give you a little updates on things we might know. First of all, just as we're excited about today's presentations, we're really welcoming volunteers that want to present future webinars, especially about how your ADC is responding to disruptions of the in-person visits during this COVID period. Also, I just learned yesterday evening that the fall ADC meeting will be virtual, and it is likely that the data cores will have a 45-minute section. So the Data Core Steering Committee would really like your feedback on whether we think maybe a format of 4 10-minute presentations, or if there was some other way to share information, such as short presentations and a forum discussion. So we're really kind of open to what's going to be most helpful to members of Data Core, so then we can work with you all in planning this. Also, just to remind you all that NACC will be sending out requests for people who would like to be considered to be elected to the Data Steering Committee. Usually that request goes out in August, so please think about this opportunity. It is a 3-year commitment, but it's not a particularly heavy lift, but it is to help organize the webinar series, to help plan in most years where we have in-person meetings, the analytic workshop before the main fall meeting, and also then to plan the fall Data Core's presentations. And then also we are working on initiatives, just like before we didn't used to have these webinars. We're looking at more and more opportunities so that the Data Cores can be sharing amongst each other. So with that very quick background, I'd like to open up the presentation today, and I'm very excited that we have some people from the Wisconsin ADRC that are going to be presenting on what they've been doing. So we have Alice Spalitta and Arseny Semin. So I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen with you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the webinar. We're very happy that you can spend some time with us. My name is Alice Spalitta. I am the Data Services Manager for the Wisconsin ADRC. I have been with the Wisconsin ADRC since 2016, and my background is in health informatics and software testing. And I will be presenting this afternoon with my colleague Arseny. Arseny, are you there?
Yep. My name's Arseny Semin. I have more of a programming and coding background. I'm new to the Wisconsin ADRC. I started this year actually in January, either of those two, and have been working on sort of trying to automate different processes and writing scripts and code for the center.
Thank you. And Arseny has been very instrumental in helping us complete our transition to paperless data entry. When we signed up to present this webinar, COVID-19 was not on the radar yet, so I think it is a very opportune time to talk about moving to paperless data entry. Our presentation today will have 2 parts. In the first half, I will be talking a little bit about REDCap. I will be presenting some details about our visit format, and then we'll talk about the implementation of REDCap and transitioning to paperless data entry. There will be an opportunity for questions, and the chat feature is open, so if you want to submit questions using the chat, you're welcome to do that. I will probably not answer the questions until the end of my presentation, and Arseny will also have a time for questions at the end of his slides. Why REDCap? You probably know there are some advantages to REDCap. It is open source, which means that you can get started with a very low cost. It is web-based, you can access it from anywhere. It is also HIPAA compliant, so it's easy to get it IRB approved. And it has some excellent built-in audit trails. The users like the fact that for every field in the database, you can see who entered that value, when it was changed, and what it used to be before. It's also very easy to use. You can learn to use it in a very short time. Students can learn to use it. It's easy for the staff. And you can create forms without having to know any programming. But for those who do like to program, REDCap has an API, so you can automate your processes using the API. And finally, we note that there are many centers using REDCap for capturing the NACC data. So there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate with others. And when new forms become available, you can collaborate and then share the work. There are some limitations as well. REDCap has a very rigid structure. That means that once you create a variable and you associate data with it, you cannot make changes. And the other limitation for REDCap is reporting capabilities. And the way we get around this at the Wisconsin ADRC is we use SQL. Our visit is probably similar to the visit in many of the other centers. We see participants ages 45 to over 90 and their study partners. And our participants are placed into one of 5 cohorts based on diagnosis. We have the AD group, mild clinical impairment or MCI. We also have a group for younger controls. They're ages 45 to 65 at the time of enrollment. An older control group, ages 66 and over. And we also have a group for individuals who have some impairment, but it's not due to dementia. The visit happens in several rooms. We generally start in the clinical research unit at the hospital, but for most participants, we ask them that they move into a different testing room because the CRU is a busy area and there's a high demand for the rooms. We also have a partnership office, so that means that our data has to come from other locations and it needs to be transmitted securely to the data services group. We administer the initial, follow-up, and telephone packet, and later I will show you how this shows up in REDCap. But we also have a large number of center-specific forms, and finally we have biomarker forms for being able to track the biomarkers. The visit is completed by more than one staff member. We have a clinician packet and a visit coordinator packet. And this is also another challenge when talking about implementing electronic data entry. Here is an overview of our systems, and this shows you where REDCap sits around the other systems and how the data flows. In the pre-visit portion, we collect some demographic information and we schedule the visit. And this is also the time when we print the data collection forms. And this is the overview of the process prior to going paperless. Then at the visit, we administer the forms and we collect samples and images. And then finally, after the visit, the data used to be entered by the students in REDCap. During the data entry, they were doing some quality assurance and verifying that the information was complete and correct. And we also have questionnaires from collecting samples and images, and those go into REDCap as well. We actually started with REDCap a long time ago. When UDS-3 was implemented in 2015, Wisconsin worked with Kansas, and I believe there was one other center, and they built all the NACC UDS-3 forms for REDCap. After that, we built a series of data-specific forms. We started developing R code for uploading to NACC. And later on, as new forms became available, we collaborated with Kansas, or there was a collaboration with the Florida ADC, and we were able to add new forms to the project. One big milestone that we completed was in 2017 when we had to move the REDCap project from one server to another. And during that process, we realized that this is not easy. We're hoping to never have to do this again. But just be mindful that large projects are not easily moved in REDCap. And then in 2018, we started using the API with help from Department of Medicine IT. And we were able to improve the R code for uploading to NACC by also adding the section or the part where we download automatically from REDCap. This is what the project looked in REDCap, and it actually still looks like this today. So you can see at the top the 5 different cohorts. Every cohort has a set of events or visits, and REDCap uses the terminology event for visits and instruments for forms. So we have a set of instruments that gets divided among the different cohorts, and then you get to choose on a grid which forms should be administered at each visit. We have a separate event for the CLS form because the language form could be administered normally at baseline, but if the participants were already enrolled in the study, then it could be anywhere at any visit. And then for follow-up visits, we have 3 options. It could be an in-person follow-up, it could be a telephone follow-up, or we have a space where we collect biomarker questionnaire data related to that visit. In 2019, we felt like the technology was available and we had the resources and the support from the leadership to move forward with implementing paperless data entry. And it all started with the REDCap validation project that I will be talking about in just a little bit. We had to plan how the transition would happen and what changes were necessary. We also at that time granted access to our visit coordinators, which before they did not have to deal with REDCap, they were only using the paper. We give them access so they can get started just getting familiar with the software. And we continue to make improvements to the handling of the NACC errors, the QA process that happens after uploading. And then in early 2020, we were able to complete the transition. We were actually very fortunate to complete the transition right before we had to stop doing in-person visits and everybody had to go home. We were also able, with Arseny's help, to implement some other changes such as the REDCap query resolution module, which keeps track of queries directly in REDCap. We added piping and we made some other quality changes to ensure that the data is complete and accurate. So let's talk a little bit about the REDCap validation project. We were concerned before going paperless about a few things. And one of them was just how accurate is the data going to be once we collect it directly in REDCap and we do not have a paper trail. For some, the paper represented some security because when you're entering the data from paper into the software, you have a step there where you can compare and make sure that nothing is missing. And we were able to demonstrate that the REDCap had the capability to capture the data correctly by doing this validation. This was done as part of a pilot grant secured by our division administrator, Tony Huffine, and we had help from a student, Caroline Cooper. She was the programmer behind this project. And the goals of a project were mainly to check to make sure that every field had validation where possible for UDS3, not just for the NACC forms, but also for the center-specific forms. And then the second goal was to develop a set of test scripts for testing software updates. At that time, our version of REDCap was so far behind. We were concerned that once we do an upgrade, there would be some changes to the data. And the software test scripts allowed us to test and to ensure that our data was still accurate. And the outcome was that we were able to upgrade the software safely and successfully. We were able to implement uniform validation across all the forms of the center-specific forms. And we were also able to collect a list of recommendations because there were situations where data was already collected in that form and we couldn't make changes. But more importantly, this allowed us to demonstrate that if we're going to go to electronic data entry, and if our project is set up in a way where there's enough validation on the important fields, then we will not be setting ourselves up for capturing data with many errors. The second step was making a plan and figuring out how we're going to implement paperless data entry. And the first concern was connectivity. Because our visits were happening in several different rooms, we had to make sure that there was strong Wi-Fi signal in all these rooms. And we had to use Wi-Fi, not a secure connection, because our rooms are small and there was no space for a workstation. So we collaborated with Department of Medicine IT and with the hospital, and we were able to ensure that Wi-Fi was available in all the rooms, and we actually tested in different locations to make sure that no matter where we move inside the room, we will not lose connectivity. The next thing was deciding on devices, and we listened to others, and I understand that there was already an idea out there that the Microsoft Surface tablets were working for this pretty well. We tested laptops and we tested the iPads, and almost all of our staff preferred the iPad. They felt like the Apple iPad with the Apple Pen was a good combination that was mimicking the paper and pencil format. It was small enough so that they could move around the room, and it was not obstructing the view between the clinician and the participant. We also purchased keyboards, and we have different keyboards for the clinicians and coordinators. Clinicians get the regular iPad keyboards, but for coordinators, we went with the Logitech K380. And the reason for this is that we are administering the NIH Toolbox test, and it's very convenient to be able to detach the keyboard. We leave the iPad with the participant, but the staff can take the keyboard behind and continue to administer and control the test from there. We also had to take an inventory of all the forms in use, and we had to decide which forms could go paperless. We also had to decide what was the workflow for the clinicians and coordinators, and we worked with everybody to make sure that the order of the forms was working out, and we had to go and make changes in REDCap. And Arseny was very instrumental here. He went and he made sure that when the clinician logs into REDCap, the forms for the clinician are organized in the order in which the visit needs to happen. The clinician goes in, and there are two links in the header, and they can link either to the D1 during consensus, or they can go to the A1, and then from there they can just save and go next, and that way advance through all the forms. There's also the menu on the side, so if they want to skip a form, they are welcome to do that, but ensuring that the workflow was set up in REDCap made it easy for them in the beginning. Once the devices were purchased and we had the order of forms corrected in REDCap, then we moved on to training. We had individual and group sessions, and we also secured a room with laptops where everybody could come in and practice, and we set up some practice times. In addition to the practice times, we had a REDCap playground, which was basically a copy of a project where everybody could go and play around, make changes, create forms, create new visits, and play around with the forms in an environment where they couldn't affect the actual data and they felt comfortable, but yet it looked exactly the same like the production database. And then finally, we had a pilot project to test this new format. We selected one clinician and two coordinators, and we selected different visits for participants with AD, MCI, and controls. And we wanted to test out both the devices and the workflow. But more importantly, we wanted to know what the impact would be. Will this make the visit longer? Will we, how will it be received by both the staff and the participant? And the feedback was positive. Everybody felt like they could learn this. This was something that would work out. And even the participants were very receptive. We had one participant saying, "You should have done this a long time ago." So at the end of our implementation, we were able to make some changes. We had fewer data collections forms to print because now a lot of the data was collected directly in REDCap. You can see here that for the visit, the data is going straight into REDCap. We do not have a long period of time where the data has to go to the students and then they verify it and they put it in REDCap. And then for the post-visit, we still have some forms to enter, but the time for data entry after the visit has been greatly reduced. In conclusion, we are able to convert to paperless all the data entry forms for the NACC UDS3. The clinician packet is almost entirely paperless. We only have one form that is a radiology form and we cannot change. And then there's the physical exam worksheet, which the clinicians prefer to have on paper because it's easier to move around and take notes as they go. For the coordinator packet, the only forms that are on paper are the CDR worksheet, and we're working on a solution for that using the Apple Pen. And then for the testing packet, all the testing packet is still on paper. And some other ways to save paper could be using laminated copies. We were able to save an additional 15 pieces of paper per visit by using laminated copies of a questionnaire for data collected by our center on center-specific forms. And what we do is we take the laminated copy, we give it to the study partner, they fill it out, they give it back to the study coordinator, and then the study coordinator is able right then to click the right fields in REDCap and capture this information. And we use wet erase marker just because the dry erase smudge is a lot easier. We were able to reduce data entry time by 50%. Our scanning time also went down significantly to 60% and probably even more by now. But more importantly, we were able to take advantage of the software validation and to reduce our pre-upload queries by almost 80%. And the validation was there before, but it was used at the wrong time. Using validation after data entry created this back and forth where data was missing on the paper and the students had to go back and consult with the clinician or the coordinator to complete the form. Whereas now, when they enter the form in REDCap, they're prompted right away if they're saving without providing a value for a particular field. We saved over 75 pieces of paper. We are able to upload to NACC faster, and more importantly, we're able to continue to conduct telephone visits remotely. And this is something that I know it has been on our mind and it is on everybody's mind right now. So this is a time when I invite you to ask questions. I know that I believe there are some questions in the Q&A, and also if you want to raise your hand, we can allow you to speak. And Arseny, if you wouldn't mind helping me with that.
So maybe you should first look at our 4 questions within the question and answer function.
Okay, so one question is, was this by double entry validation or representation of form results? I am not sure what this question relates to, but we were doing double data entry before. We were entering the data on paper first and then in the software. And the validation was in the software, but it was only used by the students and not by the clinicians in the beginning. Can you give a little more detail about your Cori customer database? What is the software behind it? Yes, I can speak to this. So Cori is a software, a database that we built in-house with help from Department of Medicine IT. It is based on Ruby on Rails, and we developed it to fit our needs. Prior to Cori, we had an open source database that was meeting most of our needs, but it was not very flexible. And we looked at everything that was available on the market, and Dumb IT came back and they said, there's nothing that will meet your needs. We have to design something in-house. Unfortunately, we are not able to share it right now because it's not in a format that would be easily adopted by our centers, but we're happy to talk about the process and to even do a demo for those who are interested. How do you link subjects to samples between REDCap and Freezer Pro? Do you put metadata about the samples from Freezer Pro and represent them into REDCap? This is a very good question. We have just started engaging in the process to implement Freezer Pro. So we're actually just now, the software is installed, but we don't have any data in there. Prior to Freezer Pro, we had an in-house system called LIMS, and we are talking about potentially using API from our contact management database API to talk to Freezer Pro and hopefully just keep minimal information in Freezer Pro and just link the data with IDs and visit numbers and maybe one other element. Is Booked a scheduling system? Can anyone elaborate? Yes, Booked is a scheduling calendar. It was, I believe it's an open source software that we adopted and made some changes to fit our needs. It's basically a calendar that allows us to schedule visits, but also to assign resources. And that way we can show which clinicians need to be in which visits and at what time. What kind of work code was required to get REDCap to upload to NACC? Arseny will be talking about this in just a little bit. How long was the time frame from idea phase to successful implementation? If we talk about the first time when we started looking at REDCap and going paperless, that was a very long time, but it didn't have to be that way. We implemented REDCap in 2015, and we just went live with it in March of this year. The reason why we didn't go paperless right away was, again, connectivity and the fact that the software and the technology was not there yet. However, for anybody looking to go with REDCap at this time, there are a lot of resources. We actually have a page at the end of this presentation where we will show some of the resources. All the forms have already been built, and there's a lot of also help from the centers who have implemented REDCap to kind of walk you through the steps necessary. Design-wise, are you using the REDCap web interface or the survey design for real-time capture? And 2, do you have a backup strategy for Wi-Fi failure when REDCap web cannot be accessed? Very good question. So design-wise for REDCap, we use the longitudinal project for UDS3. So we don't use the live surveys. We have other projects that use the live surveys, but for UDS3, we just use the longitudinal design. And then regarding backup for Wi-Fi failure, we do have several Wi-Fi connections. So if one of them fails, then the other one could become available. They're from different sources. And then the other option is just to save the data locally on the iPad and then try to recreate it later. The timeout for REDCap for us is 30 minutes. So we have not experienced any problems yet. And also another thing is we have not had any issues with battery for the iPads and for the Apple Pens. So we feel like the duplication in Wi-Fi signal should be giving us enough flexibility in case the Wi-Fi stops working. Do you consider using my chart from Epic for participant tracking and scheduling? The Wisconsin ADRC currently doesn't have Epic and our systems linked. That's something we may be doing in the future, but right now we're not able to do that. Do you allow image scanning as a separate event visit, or are they bound to a visit? We do allow imaging as a separate visit, and this is why, while in REDCap, I showed that we have one event for in-person visit, one for telephone, and one for biomarker. Biomarkers are actually linked to a visit after the fact. When we download the data, they're linked based on the date when the visit happened. So we find the nearest biomarker to the visit after the fact. But in REDCap, the event is a placeholder allowing us to capture biomarker information every year or every other year. We will be talking more about the piping and the data quality rules in the second half. How are you handling non-editable REDCap fields when NACC UDS LBD changes field value choices? We're not using the LBD module. What we have done in the past when a new field becomes available is we will create a new field or we will create a new form. I'm not sure this answers your question. If it's not, please post again. You mentioned that you're working on converting a few more forms now. Any other next steps or phases that you're working on or planning? Yes, we're waiting for the TCOG packet to become available, and we're hoping to adopt that. And we're also on an annual basis reviewing the forms that we're administering and making changes. We're making the changes both to make sure that they still meet our needs and it's not data that we no longer need or there's something new that we need to collect, but also to harmonize with our sister study, which is RAP. There are some questions specifically about brain images. For brain images, if you would like to email me at the end of a session and I can put you in touch with our brain imaging specialists. When the Z1X replaced the Z1, how did you change the variable names of a Z1 so there would not be duplication of variable names. We kept both Z1 and Z1X, so we have two forms, and we used the mapping of the forms to the events or the visits to show which visits should have a Z1 or the Z1X. But generally speaking, we handled this on the back end using our, so that when we upload the data to NACC, we can pull either from the Z1X or from the Z1, but we only have one form. So we have both forms in the database, but we manipulate the data for the upload. Can we convert Qualtrics into REDCap into a straightforward way? I don't know. That's a good question. I would tend to say no, but REDCap does have a tool to allow you to import data. So you could take that Excel template, and if you can fit your data from Qualtrics in the template, then you should be able to upload to REDCap. If we're talking about REDCap project structure, I don't think that would be possible. You would have to either use the structure from NACC or just build it from scratch in REDCap. Can you speak to any of the complexities you've encountered with the neuropsych exam C2 form? So we went paperless with just the summary sheet, the NACC C2, but the worksheet for the most part is still on paper. We do not calculate any scaled scores or any z-scores in REDCap. We also do that on the side. We have an Excel tool. So the only thing that is captured electronically in REDCap is the summary NACC C2. We have a worksheet in REDCap as well, but that is done after the visit. So after the visit, we fill that in. Have you thought about converting the forms that are still paper-based to the reusable wet erase laminated form? Thinking about the cognitive forms. Yes, we're trying to keep this to a minimum just because, again, our participants change rooms and we collect data from outside of our main location. And we are still concerned about losing data, smudging. Things can happen to a laminated form with a marker. We opted to just start with the forms that could be entered into REDCap right then. So the study partner will fill out the laminated sheet and we enter the data into the system right there when we're with them in the room. Maybe later on, if we feel confident that the laminated sheets could not be damaged in transportation, maybe we will consider other forms. Oh, somebody responded, there's no straightforward way from Qualtrics to REDCap. So you don't use remote data entry for local forms and worksheets? For some of them, not for all of them. Okay, I think that's it. Arseny, if you want to take over, I will let you continue.
Let me lose my voice first, and then let me share this screen. Okay, so I was going to talk about sort of, let's move this so that I can actually see my screen. I was gonna go through an overview of kind of the processes that, in a little bit more detail, the processes that we managed to implement when we went paperless and kind of the things that we learned in the process of implementing these automated scripts for helping with the upload and query resolution process, both the pre-NACC upload query resolution and the actual query resolution when it comes to handling what NACC returns in their email after finalization. You don't have to concentrate on this slide too closely. Don't bother reading the text and anything. This is just sort of an example of what our query resolution flows looked like prior to going paperless and prior to implementing several of these process improvements. And the point of this is just to get across it, like there's a lot of arrows, there's a lot of boxes, and each of these is basically like somebody has to do something and then pass it along to the next person. And some of these are like very picky and particular, like first you have to mark an X on a spreadsheet and then you have to know that the next person has to check that spreadsheet and things like that. But kind of just saying that this is what we were dealing with, and what told us that we had something that at this point could really do with being slimmed down, and found ways where we can just shorten this process as best as possible. Most of this slide is pretty obvious. I imagine the advantages of an automated process over a manual process is that they're fast and predictable, that they, computers are way better at organizing columns and changing rows and comparing data than we are, at least in terms of speed, and that they're very predictable. So you can sort of rely on exactly what it is that you're expecting out of them. But on the other hand, sort of speaking to the challenges that we came across when we were doing this, is that there's a bunch of things that maybe intuitively as a person you don't realize are going to be problems, like issues with your data that you don't know that you have yet, or just issues with like how you understand your data that don't come across. Like for instance, if you have inconsistent or missing data, you need to be very careful about the way you write your scripting, because you might end up not submitting what you actually think you're submitting. The script isn't going to automatically know that a null and a zero are the same thing. It's not going to know that white space can be ignored, or that capitals, things like obvious things like that, but also larger things like maybe an entire form is missing and it doesn't necessarily know that it's supposed to be there. Other issues that they're pretty inflexible. I was saying that they're predictable, but these pair together. They're predictable, which is good, but they're also, that predictability adds to inflexibility. They're not creative, they can't think. They're not gonna tell you like, it looks like this is a form that can be submitted, but I don't know. It's just gonna say like, oh, this doesn't meet my criteria, we're not submitting it. And if there's no actual human oversight of the script in this as well, it's just not gonna get submitted, and you're gonna be missing that data. And then finally, they can also be kind of brittle. This is speaking to like, if NACC changes the format of the error HTML that they send us when a finalization occurs, or if we change the format of our REDCap on the other end, if the script isn't made robust enough, it'll break. And sometimes actually making a script really robust can also be a problem, because that makes it very complicated and also introduces other points of failure. So those are things that you kind of have to weigh. Not everything needs to be scripted. Some things like you don't have to go overboard, just like the really difficult tasks. Okay, tools that we're using and that I find are really helpful, especially if you have multiple people who are going to be looking at these processes. Version control in a repository, for instance, Git and Bitbucket is what we use. It's provided by the Department of Medicine. These are great for storing all of your code in a single place and being able to collaborate with multiple people at the same time. And you can keep a version history of everything that you're working on, so that, if anything ever breaks down, you can always revert to what it was supposed to be. Documentation is probably the most important here, though. You want to be writing down what it is that you've written, what it is that your script does, what it is that, why you even wrote it in the first place, and documenting and putting it in some central location that everybody can look at. Because, if the point here is that we automate things so that they go faster, it doesn't make sense if then nobody knows what that script does and they can't find it and they can't reproduce it. So documentation, we use knowledge base, which is something that the University of Madison provides us. Elise already talked about it, but the REDCap API is wonderful. It is necessary for any of these scripts to work. And the languages that we use for our scripts are R and Python. So talking about the upload to NACC. A quick overview of what our kind of previous semi-automated process was. Elise already went a little bit over this, but there's there's the data entry that's done into REDCap after a visit takes place. And then there is like that process that I showed you, the second slide, the kind of many arrows of the queries being resolved. So there was a spreadsheet where everybody had shared, and they would be marking that down when the data entry people found a query, they would add it to that, and then the coordinators and clinicians were expected to check that spreadsheet, see if there was one with their initials, they would go to a cabinet, pick up the paper, et cetera, and that would loop around, and then finally, eventually, the queries would be resolved. At that point, another person, the data entry person, most likely, would take the ID and the visit number for that packet that was just completed and add it to another separate spreadsheet. And that would be the spreadsheet that then we would go off of to know that's what we need to submit to NACC. We would take that, list of packets, feed it into our upload script, and that would generate, it would query the REDCap API, pull out all that relevant information out, combine it into a single output file. Well, we would have to then combine that into a single output file because it was broken down by form and uploaded to NACC. So issues with this old process was that a lot of the tracking for it was manual. So it's a spreadsheet that relies on people being really good about marking whose turn it is next and checking off their phase of it. It's not enough to just solve the query on paper, but they also have to go into the spreadsheet and mark that the query is solved and initial it. If they accidentally have to leave it on their desk or something, then it becomes a hassle to keep track of. There's a lot of back and forth. It kind of already was bleeding into this topic, but people are passing back a football constantly. And if anybody happens to drop it, it's not like, I mean, you just forget the football exists and the process stops. And there's multiple users and there's a single shared spreadsheet, which can cause a lot of issues, like with people overwriting other people's data, people not being able to work because the spreadsheet is currently open somewhere else. There was just a very fragile system with a lot of many points of failure is the point. So what we found when we went paperless was REDCap had a built-in module for this that was really effective at solving this problem. It was called the data resolution workflow, and you can enable it in your project in the project setup area. And what it does is it creates this very convenient dashboard for tracking queries that people can open directly on a field. So I'll come back to this slide, but I want to show a screenshot of the next one, where you see here there's a field. Whoever is going through and verifying the data believes that this is wrong for whatever reason. It's missing, it doesn't add up to the proper sum. There is a comment box, you can click on it, it opens this pop-up, and you can type in what you think, like, I think this is wrong, and then assign it to whoever you think is the person who would best be able to solve this query and open it. And then that query appears on a dashboard for that user. So that user can log into REDCap, have a habit of doing this, or we can send out an email reminder to them like, hey, check out your queries in REDCap. And it would just have a list where they can see the query, they can click on the query, it takes them directly to that field that was discrepant, and they can make their decision about how they want to fix it. And then once they do that, it immediately pops back onto the dashboard of whoever opened it in the first place, or whoever is going to be doing the final verification step. So the things that are really wonderful about this is, the tracking happens mostly automatically. There isn't as much, I mean, there's still the back and forth, but it's kind of hidden. You don't have to you're not consciously pinging people. It is being handled by the module itself, and multiple users can use it at the same time, which is a godsend. It's wonderful. So there's way fewer failure points, and it means that our query resolution can happen a lot cleaner. But so in addition to that, if you recall, one of the things that we found was we needed a way to know what the new packets were that we needed to send to NACC would be. And implementing the data query resolution module sort of interfered with that because there wasn't a natural person who would know, like, this has been completed, this entire packet, we'll add it to the spreadsheet. But that was also, as it turned out, something we realized not a necessary step for anybody to do, because if we simply define what a completed visit looks like in REDCap, are all of the required forms marked as complete in the system, then we can just do a diff between a download of the NACC A1 data. So just like download a list of the visits that are currently in NACC in the current and working database, and then compare that with the completed visits in REDCap programmatically using the REDCap API. And then we know whatever the difference is, those are the new packets that need to be uploaded. And then we just grab those automatically and send them over to NACC. There's some edge cases here that there's some tricks to it. Like I was saying, it's inflexible. Required forms, if you have a required form that is not complete yet, but the required forms are, it'll catch that visit like it's done and want to submit it because it doesn't necessarily know that a non-required form is necessary. So in addition to sending these, we also track separately, like, is anything missing any optional forms? And if so, maybe we want to revisit them later. Now, an issue is we don't have a solution at the moment for knowing when to re-upload packets to NACC. So we're really good at knowing what the new packets are that still need to be sent over that are fresh. But if ever there is a packet that is fixed in the past, maybe it was from a NACC query or something like that, we obviously can't compare that to the NACC A1. It's already in NACC. It's just in the working database. Unfortunately, REDCap, it doesn't really give us a good way to see what a recently modified visit is. It only allows us to see what a recently modified record is, and those don't match up, and we don't want to submit an entire record of a person again. We only want to send the visit that was changed. So for now, unfortunately, this is a manual process. We're still looking at a solution for it, though. So then the second part, that second chunk, would be going over what our NACC query process looks like and some of the things that we changed going paperless to make it go quicker. So first off, we have a script. This is the main thing, really, is that we have a script that reads that HTML file that NACC sends when you finalize. We finalize everything so that we get a full list of every single query that's currently, every single error and alert that NACC currently has. And we have a spreadsheet, our own spreadsheet that we use for tracking the ones that we want to be looking at. And it reads the NACC file, it reads our current query spreadsheet, and it combines the two. So that's to say, anything that is no longer appearing as an error in the report, it removes it from the spreadsheet. Anything that is still appearing in the report, it keeps it on the spreadsheet with any information we might have typed in. And anything that's new is obviously added to the spreadsheet. And in addition to that, it goes into REDCap and pulls the initials and the visit date, so that way we know, like, what is the oldest visit in the query spreadsheet. So those are like the higher priority ones. And also, you know, who's responsible for that query so that they can take care of it quicker. We found that like a really helpful, fast way to just immediately, as soon as we get that report, we can create the spreadsheet again and ping all of the coordinators and clinicians saying, hey, check out the spreadsheet again. It's been updated with new work. This is an example of what it looks like. You're probably familiar with the top part, the email that gives you this kind of gives you a report of all of the errors. And then you'll see down below is the spreadsheet that we have that parses it into something that is more human readable and manageable. People will then check off, like, this is verified, this is changed, this doesn't need changing, things like that. And then we would go in and re-upload what needs to be re-uploaded or verify the alerts in NACC that need to be verified. Besides that, though, there are also two things I'm going to talk about right now, the data quality rules and piping and REDCap that we've used to also try and minimize as many NACC queries as we can possibly get. This is like before we even submit. So if we catch them early, it's better than if we have NACC alert us about these errors. So another module in REDCap that we found very helpful, especially now that the coordinators and clinicians enter information directly into REDCap, is the data quality rules. These are conditional logic statements that you can write. I'm sure many of you are probably already familiar with these, but the conditional logic statements you can write for what would appear to be like a wrong value. You can use this for summing. It's really good for cross-form and within-form errors. So like, you know, you marked that this patient is alive, but you also marked that they have an autopsy. This doesn't make sense. Or, you know, your CDR doesn't sum up to the proper value. These are all taken from a Word document that NACC provides about all of their errors. We don't bother with the alerts because, frankly, we can't pre-verify an alert when we submit to NACC. So we only are tracking the errors in the data quality rules. The one issue I would say about the data quality rules, because for the most part, they're wonderful and they work very well for us, is that having them execute on save, you have two options. You can have them execute on save, or you can have them execute manually from the data quality rule dashboard. If you have them execute on save, it sort of locks the person into the form. You can't save, see a data quality rule and choose to ignore it. You basically have to handle it right then and there, meaning like the save and go to next form functionality doesn't work. You can get around that by instead manually looking through and picking the next form you want to go to. But our coordinators don't really like that process, and we don't really want to make them do that. It also feels like a kind of a hacky workaround. So for the time being, we're just executing them all manually from the dashboard. it's good for cross-form and within-form errors, but the cross-visit errors, data quality rules, at least for the structure of our project, it doesn't quite work. So what we've been trying to do is instead use the smart variables to pipe that information in, or just regular piping by piping from a particular event. So for instance, if a subject has a baseline, which most of them do, I should say, if a subject is in UDS3, their baseline is in UDS3, then we can just look at the baseline visit and say, okay, give us the birth month and birth year, so that way they don't have to, they have something that they can check back against. If they don't, there's also the option to, using smart variables, look at the previous visit. And this is very helpful, except we found more exceptions to this working than not, is kind of what we've learned, the unfortunate case. It's partially due to the format of our project. We have multiple arms. So the previous visit might have been in a different arm, and it's not going to know that. REDCap isn't. Another problem is we have different types of events. We have the telephone and we have the follow-up event. And so maybe what you wanted to do is look at the previous follow-up, but there's a telephone event in the way, and that'll kind of muddy up the process. But where we can pipe from baseline is the thing that we found to be the most consistent. We tried to pipe in those values, so like the birth date of the father and the mother, the birth date of the individual, things like that, so that we can prevent at least those more obvious cross-visit errors. How much time? Okay, I gotta wrap it up real quick. This is just something, probably, maybe one of the most, I guess I left it for last, but it might be one of the most important things that we learned. Is a really important thing is actually, maybe counterintuitively, you want scripts for your scripts. It sounds like a huge pain, but it's actually really helpful because of those challenges that were brought up earlier, where there can be inconsistent data, there can be, you know, a change on somebody's end that you don't notice. And if you're just running these scripts automatically, you might not know that something is wrong. So you want scripts that are testing your scripts. You want things to just every once in a while, you run a sanity check and validate the data that you have. And that's kind of like a semi-automated and semi-manual process. Of like, it's automated because it grabs all the info for you, but it's manual because then a human being is going to look at that and see if anything appears to be right or wrong. Examples of some of these things that we have would be, for instance, we have a script that compares everything that's in our REDCap with what is in our NACC data freeze, and whatever values don't match up. Sometimes that's just like, there's a couple of issues where we know that those are okay to ignore. And then some of them is an issue where like, oh, something broke down in this process, and that tells us that we need to revisit either our automated scripts or see what might have happened. We also have something for, you know, for checking the NACC query parser, where it will compare everything that's in the NACC working database with what's currently in the NACC query list. And if there's something missing, it tells us that, you know, we should revisit, we should check out what's going on. So you can't just blindly rely on maybe it seems obvious, but you can't just blindly rely on these automated scripts. You actually kind of want to have sanity scripts in place that you run from time to time just to check up and see, you know, is everything working well? And that's the end for me and my presentation, and I'll be looking at some of the questions that people have posted. Let me look.
We have a number of questions in the Q&A, and I can just start by answering one of them. A couple of the people in the audience asked, "Is this where did the pre-upload queries come from?" The pre-upload queries come from mostly from entering data from paper. So we still have some paper forms. We also have the main idea is that we have not transitioned the NACC queries into REDCap. We feel like our process with the script parsing for the report and populating the Excel spreadsheet is more efficient than trying to have somebody put the NACC queries in REDCap and tracking them in REDCap. So we have the REDCap resolution module for any queries that we may find before the upload, either because the paper was not filled out correctly or because we find inconsistencies between a center-specific form and the NACC form, and then we use the parser code to go through the NACC report and populate the NACC queries in a spreadsheet.
Let me see. Okay, so that one that you just answered was, okay. We use a separate visit or clinical visit record with fields for different parts of processing, validation, and completion status. It's a separate visit or clinical visit record. I don't think I understand. Maybe you understand what is being said here better, Elise, that they have two separate visits for clinical and for actual processing. So they re-enter it twice. Maybe I'm gonna look back at that question a little bit later.
Okay.
The queries addressed by the REDCap resolution module are the ones obtained through NACC error report after finalizing data. No, so the REDCap, you kind of just spoke about this, but the pre-NACC errors are the ones that we sort of catch where maybe during a visit, somebody forgot to enter something, and we just want to verify on our end that, you know, all of our I's and T's are crossed, or all of our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed before we even submit to NACC. And so the REDCap resolution module is like the first preliminary verification step before we even submit to NACC. We actually don't use the REDCap resolution module for NACC queries because there isn't an easy way to then import those queries back into REDCap and into the REDCap query resolution module. We just alter the is, what's that?
I can answer this one. We just alter the is completed field to null or no, and it re-uploads the visit. What we're trying to avoid is re-uploading everything from REDCap again into NACC. We could just use the is completed field, but our challenge has been just trying to figure out a way to generate out of REDCap a list of packets, or at least the forms and IDs and visit numbers that have changed from the last time we uploaded to NACC.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so yeah, just responded, thank you. Yeah, so I did just kind of, oh, you responded to that question. We provide a tool for visits that pull data from all visits, UDS 1 through 3, per subject participant. Participant visits 1 through 3. One of the things that we're definitely not doing anymore is re-uploading any of our UDS 2 visits. Those are frozen, and we're only looking at ever re-uploading UDS 3 visits. We are kind of what Elise just said. We try to only update new packets or changed packets, not every packet at once. So part of the challenge for our re-upload is knowing which packets are necessary for re-upload. And this is just because, actually, speaking to scripting, we are kind of going through and analyzing all of our existing UDS 3 data to understand what discrepancies exist in our REDCap and our NACC database, so that potentially in the future we could just upload everything at once. But right now there are historical, like there are older visits in REDCap that we don't want to re-upload because we know that it would cause problems in NACC. We know that they have errors that we still need to go back and revisit just because they were from so far back. And that's a cleaning process that we're currently going through. And then in that case, we would be able to just simply submit everything at once every time if we chose to. What code do you use to transform from REDCap output to the NACC system format? So it is originally the code was written in R. It is a script that was written in-house. It's like unfortunately it's a per variable thing. Most of the variables you can just convert one-to-one, but some of the variables are more complicated, and you do need to translate from the REDCap output to the NACC system format. But there was an R code that was written for that, and then that was later modified into a Python script so that it would be a bit more modular, so that we could introduce changes to our REDCap and easily fold them into outputting NACC code. Can you provide GitHub links to all of your scripts? Are they Apache 2.0 licensed? That's a good question, and I don't really have an answer to that. I would be happy to provide that information, and we don't store our, I guess this might be a question for our ADC, or for maybe Elise can answer it better, but we don't have anything like our own data in there, since it is all hidden in a .env file. So it's possible that we could provide many of these scripts, especially like the R upload script or the NACC error parsing script. But at the moment, they are just within the Department of Medicine's private bit bucket, and so it's not available. I don't know, do you know anything more on that, Elise?
I think we can definitely share the code, and we have shared the R code in the past, but if you can just send us an email, or we will email you and ask what code you're exactly interested in.
To determine upload, we use the field is complete to re-upload. I think this is the thing from before. I mean, there is like, it would be something that we've considered, at least that I've thought about, is we could just institute a process on the coordinator, whoever's verifying their end, saying if something needs to be re-uploaded, they mark a value in the header form or something like that. That would be a way for us to manually flag what needs to be re-uploaded. The only trouble with that is like what happens when people forget to, but at least for the moment, re-upload is manual, so it wouldn't be. So that would be something that would possibly be worth looking into, is just for whoever's verifying these forms or whoever is modifying these forms, add a field that tells them, you know, this has been fixed, go ahead and send it. Do you use a REDCap calculated field to help check the math for things like GDS or MoCA? We do both. So we do a calculated field and there's a data quality rule. There is a calculated field that sits right underneath the actual input. So they still have to manually type in the GDS, but there is underneath the GDS a calculated field that is suggesting to them what the value looks, well, what it should sum up to. In addition to that, there's also a data quality rule that we can run that also does the math to check if everything's been entered correctly.
And just to clarify, you could use a calculated field if it was implemented at the beginning, but because we already had saved data, we couldn't convert the field to a calculated field.
It is a query tool, so they can see what has changed.
I can answer this one. Instead of pushing just data recently modified, why not push all the data you have each time to capture those optional forms? We could. The problem that we encountered there is just making the whole upload process a lot slower. The larger the file, the more times it takes to upload to NACC. And in my conversations before with Janine from NACC, if a lot of centers are trying to submit at the same time, it could create an issue. So we find that our uploads are a lot faster if we just break it down and just upload smaller packets.
We also store our files, not on our own server, but on a Department of Medicine GitHub, because I mean, I guess it would be okay for us to store it on a public GitHub, but it would have to be a discussion, obviously, because it's for HIPAA reasons. But that being said, if there's anything like people are interested in having or seeing any of our checking scripts or the upload scripts or whatever might have been mentioned for parsing the NACC query error email, we'd be happy to work with sharing them or getting those working for other ADCs. And we're also, some of these suggestions for handling re-upload, or we're looking for answers to about some of the challenges that we've kind of run into or faced. So happy to collaborate, of course. That's the end of the questions for me.
All right, so we have, at the end, we just have a slide with some resources. These are not our resources, these are resources from everybody.
Actually, can I answer this question for what are the largest pain points that a NACC API could help minimize? I would say the biggest thing that I would appreciate about that is not having to manually go into the NACC website, downloading a specific CSV, and then putting that into his requisite folder and running it. If there was a NACC API, and then we could also use the REDCap API, things could just be like a single code execution. It's just like, all you have to do is click a button and it does what you want it to do, would be wonderful. Because having to log into NACC, find the values that you're actually looking for, parse those and download the CSV and put them in different places. I mean, I know that doesn't sound like it's obviously not a huge deal, but it would be so much cleaner if it could just happen in one place. And also if there was a NACC API, you know, it makes it just so much more browsable for us because we can create our own tools and solutions that would be able to update live based on what is currently in NACC, rather than having to download what's in NACC and have like a stale copy of NACC to check against, if instead we just had functionally a live copy of NACC to check against every time. So that would be wonderful. I would be thrilled. Okay, sorry for interrupting.
Thank you, Arseny. So just some of the resources that are available for those who want to get started with REDCap. NACC has just a page with a lot of information about how to get set up, the REDCap data dictionary. There are also some data quality rules, and this is all collected from different centers. I know that Suzanne from Kansas helped to get this page started. There's also the Slack Data Core channel where you can post questions. There's a NACCulator from the Florida ADC for uploading to NACC. We have some scripts as well, and we mentioned we have code for uploading to NACC and code for parsing through the NACC query report. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email us and we will try to provide some answers, or we'll direct you to the person who can answer the questions. And finally, just some acknowledgements to our leadership for making this possible, contributors from the clinical core, Department of Medicine, and those who have helped with our REDCap validation project, and all the core C team who has helped to bring this project to completion. Thank you for listening to us, and we look forward to any questions or any comments that you might have.
Thank you very much. This was an excellent presentation. I think Wisconsin must be thrilled to have you both working with them, because clearly you've done a fantastic job with this whole process. And I'm especially grateful that you've shared this with us. So you've done a great job. Thank you very much. And I really encourage, I want you to know that you had over 60 viewers, and that's really quite an achievement to do in June. So good for you. And I really encourage anybody from the ADCs to share with us, because I think these are questions you could see. You got over 40 questions and comments. We're all going through different processes with whatever our systems are. So thank you very much. And I look forward to our next seminar.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Bye.